The Valorian warship hung in Earth's orbit like a dark moon. It was massive, nearly the size of a small city, and it had weapons that could turn continents into glass. Queen Zarathil stood at the observation window of her personal chamber and looked down at the blue planet below. She had conquered 12 worlds in her lifetime. She had never lost a battle. But something about this small world made her pause. Her advisors had warned her about invading Earth. The reports were strange and confusing. Humans were weak creatures. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom. Their bodies were soft and broke easily. And yet, every species that had tried to conquer them had failed. The Kethri had sent 3 invasion fleets. None returned. The Moraxian collective had attempted a ground assault. Their entire army vanished within a week. Zarathil was not a fool. She knew when a fight was not worth the cost. So she proposed something different. A marriage. A union between the Valorian Empire and Earth. It was a political solution, clean and simple. The humans would become allies instead of enemies, and she would gain access to their territory without losing a single soldier. The humans accepted her proposal faster than she expected. They sent a name to her within 3 days. Daniel Carter, a diplomat from a place called Kansas. Zarathil read his file with growing disappointment. He was 34 years old. He had worked as a teacher before joining the diplomatic corps. He had no military training, no combat experience, and no special skills that she could identify. His psychological evaluation described him as calm, patient, and emotionally stable. The Valorian word for such qualities was boring. She wondered if the humans were insulting her by sending such an ordinary man. The wedding took place aboard her flagship. Thousands of Valorian nobles gathered in the Great Hall to witness the union. They whispered among themselves as Daniel walked down the aisle. He was shorter than most Valorians, standing only at chest height compared to the queen. His skin was smooth and pale, without scales or protective plates. He wore a simple black suit that looked almost comical next to the elaborate armor of the Valorian guests. Zarathil towered over him. She had 4 arms, each one strong enough to crush stone. Her scales shimmered in shades of deep purple and gold. Her eyes were large and dark, designed to see in the blackness of space. She was considered beautiful by Valorian standards, a warrior queen in her prime. And now she was marrying this small, soft creature. Daniel looked up at her and smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine and unafraid. Most species trembled in her presence. This human simply smiled as if he were meeting an old friend. The ceremony was brief. They exchanged vows in both languages. Daniel had learned basic Valorian in the 2 weeks before the wedding, which surprised her. Most diplomats took months to master even simple phrases. When he spoke the traditional words of union, his accent was terrible, but his pronunciation was correct. After the ceremony, there was a feast. Daniel sat beside her at the high table and watched the Valorian nobles eat. The food was strange to him, she could tell. Valorians preferred their meat raw and still warm. But Daniel did not complain. He tried everything that was offered to him, even the dishes that made his face turn slightly green dot at one point. He leaned toward her and asked a question. "Is it rude to ask for the recipe? This purple stuff is actually pretty good." Zarathil stared at him. No one had ever asked her for a recipe before. She was a queen, a conqueror, a warrior who had bathed in the blood of her enemies. And this human wanted cooking tips. She told him to speak with the kitchen staff. He thanked her and returned to his meal with apparent satisfaction. The nobles watched this exchange with confusion. They had expected the human to be terrified, or at least respectful in a fearful way. Instead, he acted as if he belonged there, as if sitting beside the most powerful being in the sector was perfectly normal. That night, Zarathil showed Daniel to their shared chambers. The room was enormous by human standards, with ceilings that stretched 30 feet high and windows that looked out into the stars. Daniel walked to the window and stood there for a long moment, staring at the darkness of space. "First time off Earth?" she asked. He nodded. "I always wanted to see the stars up close. Never thought it would happen like this, but here we are." She did not know how to respond to that. He seemed genuinely happy, despite the circumstances. He was far from his home, surrounded by aliens who could kill him without effort, married to a queen who saw him as little more than a political tool. And yet he stood at that window with the expression of a child seeing snow for the first time. Zarathul decided that humans were very strange creatures. In the days that followed, Daniel settled into life aboard the flagship with surprising ease. He woke early every morning and performed exercises in their chamber. She watched him once, curious about human fitness routines. He did something called push-ups, lowering and raising his body using only his arms. He did this for nearly an hour without stopping. When he finished, he was covered in sweat but breathing normally. She asked him why he exercised so much. His body was clearly not built for combat. What was the point of maintaining it so carefully? Daniel wiped his face with a cloth and shrugged. "Habit, I guess. My dad always said that a healthy body makes a healthy mind. Besides, you never know when you might need to run." She found his answer unsatisfying but did not press further. Daniel spent his days learning about Valorian culture. He visited every part of the ship, talking to workers and soldiers and servants. He asked questions constantly, always polite, always curious. The crew did not know what to make of him. Some thought he was a spy. Others thought he was simply stupid. But slowly, some of them began to warm to him. He remembered their names. He asked about their families. He laughed at their jokes, even when he did not fully understand them. Zarathul watched all of this from a distance. She had married this human for political reasons, nothing more. She did not expect to feel anything for him. But she found herself growing curious about the strange creature who had become her husband. He was weak and small, and utterly unremarkable by any standard she knew. And yet something about Daniel Carter made her uneasy. Something she could not quite name. It was as if she were looking at a calm ocean and sensing a storm beneath the surface. She pushed the feeling aside. He was just a human. What could he possibly do? 3 months passed aboard the Valorian flagship. Daniel Carter had become a familiar sight in the corridors, always walking somewhere with purpose, always greeting the crew with a friendly nod. Most of them had stopped viewing him as a threat or a curiosity. Now he was simply the Queen's strange human husband, harmless and perhaps even amusing. Zarathul spent most of her time managing the Empire. There were territories to govern, disputes to settle, and enemies to watch. Her marriage to Daniel had accomplished its purpose. Earth was now officially part of the Valorian alliance, and human technology had begun flowing into the Empire. It was primitive compared to Valorian science, but some of it showed promise. The humans had developed clever solutions to problems that Valorians had never considered. She saw Daniel only in the evenings, when they shared their chamber. He always asked about her day, listening with genuine interest as she described political struggles and military concerns. She found herself talking to him more than she had intended. He was easy to talk to. He never judged, never interrupted, never offered unwanted advice. He simply listened and asked thoughtful questions. One evening, she mentioned a problem with the Empire's food supplies. A blight had struck one of their agricultural worlds, threatening millions with starvation. Daniel listened carefully, then asked if Valorian scientists had considered crop rotation and soil management techniques. He explained how humans had faced similar problems throughout their history and had developed methods to prevent such disasters. Zarathul passed his suggestions to her agricultural advisors. They were skeptical at first, But after testing Daniel's methods on a small scale, they found that he was right. The techniques worked. Within a month, the blight was under control. She looked at her husband differently after that. Perhaps he was not as useless as she had assumed. The real change came during a diplomatic banquet. The Valorian Empire had many allies and vassals, and they had gathered to celebrate the anniversary of a major military victory. Nobles from a dozen species filled the great hall, eating and drinking and boasting of their conquests. Daniel sat beside Zarathul as always, quiet and observant. He had learned to navigate Valorian social customs well enough to avoid embarrassment, though he still made occasional mistakes. The nobles tolerated his presence because of his position, but most of them ignored him entirely. Then Lord Vexenar arrived. Vexenar was a Moraxian general, a hulking creature covered in thick gray hide and natural armor plates. His species had tried to conquer Earth 2 centuries ago. They had failed miserably, and Vexenar still carried a grudge. He strode into the banquet hall with the arrogance of someone who believed himself untouchable. He approached the high table and bowed to Zarathul with exaggerated politeness. Then his eyes fell on Daniel, and his lip curled with disgust. "So this is the human," Vexenar said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I have heard much about your species. Soft little creatures who live on a ball of mud and call it home. My ancestors were wise to attempt your extermination. It is a shame they failed." The hall went silent. Every eye turned toward Daniel. Zarathul felt her muscles tense. Insulting a royal consort was a serious offense. She could have Vexenar executed for such words. But before she could speak, Daniel raised his hand gently, signaling her to wait. He stood up slowly, setting his napkin on the table with careful precision. He looked at Vexenar without anger, without fear, without any emotion at all. His face was calm, almost peaceful. "Lord Vexenar," Daniel said, his voice steady, "I understand that your people have strong feelings about mine, but I think there has been a misunderstanding about what humans are capable of. Perhaps we could settle this question in a more productive way." Vexenar laughed, a harsh and ugly sound. "You wish to fight me, little creature? I would break you like a twig." Daniel shook his head. "Not a fight. A contest. I have heard that Valorians and their allies value endurance above all else. Let us test that value. The traditional staff-holding challenge. Whoever lasts longer wins." The hall buzzed with whispers. The staff-holding challenge was an ancient Valorian tradition. Competitors held a heavy-weighted staff above their heads until their strength gave out. It was a test of pure physical endurance, nothing more. Valorian warriors trained for years to excel at it. The current record was just over 8 hours. Vexenar grinned with cruel anticipation. "You challenge me to an endurance contest? Very well, human. I accept. And when you collapse, I will have proven what everyone already knows. Your species is nothing but weak prey animals pretending to be civilized." The contest began an hour later. Servants brought out 2 weighted staffs, each one heavy enough to make a normal human's arm shake just from lifting it. Daniel picked his up and raised it above his head without visible effort. Vexenar did the same, sneering at his opponent. The first hour passed. Then the second. Vexenar stood solid as a mountain, showing no signs of fatigue. Daniel stood beside him, equally still, his eyes fixed on some distant point dot. By the 4th hour, Vexenar's arms had begun to tremble. Sweat dripped down his armored hide. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to continue. Daniel remained motionless, his breathing slow and steady. The 5th hour came and went. The 6th. The 7th. Vexenar collapsed at the 8-hour mark, his arms giving out completely. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath, unable to lift the staff again. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Daniel kept holding his staff. 9 hours, 10, 11. 12. By the 13th hour, Zarthil had ordered food and water to be brought to her husband. He thanked the servant politely and continued standing. His arm shook slightly now, but his grip remained firm. At 14 hours, Daniel finally lowered the staff. He set it down gently and rolled his shoulders with a quiet sigh. "I apologize for stopping early," he said to the assembled crowd, "but I have a meeting with the Agricultural Committee in the morning, and I should get some sleep." Then he walked out of the hall, leaving absolute silence behind him. Zarthil found him in their chamber an hour later. He was sitting by the window, rubbing his arms with a grimace of pain. When he saw her, he smiled sheepishly. "I might have overdone it a little," he admitted. "My arms are going to hurt for a week." She sat beside him and studied his face. "How did you do that? No human should be capable of such endurance. Your muscles, your bone structure, nothing in your biology explains what I just witnessed." Daniel shrugged. "Humans are stubborn. When someone tells us we cannot do something, we tend to do it anyway just to prove them wrong. It is probably our worst quality. Or our best, depending on how you look at it." That night, after Daniel fell asleep, Zarthil accessed Earth's historical archives. She read for hours, her eyes growing wider with each passing document. She read about soldiers who marched for days without rest, athletes who ran hundreds of miles through deserts, explorers who survived years in frozen wastelands with nothing but their will to live. She read about wars where humans fought against impossible odds and won through sheer refusal to surrender. She read about diseases that should have wiped them out, disasters that should have ended their civilization, challenges that should have been insurmountable. Humans had survived them all. By morning, Zarthil understood something that no Valorian had ever grasped. Her husband was not weak. He was not harmless. He was something far more dangerous. He was human. The Valorian royal palace sat on a planet called Throne, a world of purple forests and silver mountains that had served as the Empire's capital for 10,000 years. Zarthil had brought Daniel there after 6 months of marriage, deciding that it was time for him to see the heart of her civilization. Daniel loved it immediately. He spent his days exploring the gardens, learning the names of alien plants, and talking with the palace staff about their lives and families. The servants adored him. He was kind, curious, and never treated them as beneath him. Some of them had started bringing him small gifts, native flowers and handmade crafts that he displayed proudly in his personal study. Zarthil watched her husband with growing confusion. She had expected him to be overwhelmed by Valorian culture, intimidated by its grandeur and complexity. Instead, he had adapted to it as easily as breathing. He learned their customs, respected their traditions, and found ways to contribute that no one had anticipated. He had started a small garden outside their chambers, growing earth vegetables that he shared with anyone who wanted to try them. The palace cook had become obsessed with something called tomatoes. Daniel taught her how to make a dish called pasta, and now it was served at royal banquets alongside traditional Valorian cuisine. Small things, perhaps, but they mattered. Daniel Carter was changing the palace simply by being himself. Then came the night of the attack. It happened without warning. The Kethray rebels had been planning for months, gathering intelligence, bribing guards, and waiting for the perfect moment. They struck at midnight, when the palace defenses were at their weakest. 100 warriors in black armor breached the outer walls and fought their way toward the royal chambers. Zarthil woke to the sound of plasma fire. She was on her feet in an instant, her warrior instincts taking over. Daniel was beside her, already awake, his eyes scanning the darkness with unusual intensity. "We need to move," he said quietly. "The shooting is getting closer." She grabbed her ceremonial blade from the wall. It was a poor weapon compared to a plasma rifle, but it was better than nothing. Daniel had no weapon at all. He was wearing sleep clothes, barefoot and unarmed. The door exploded inward. 3 HFY warriors burst into the room, their rifles raised and ready. They were massive creatures, standing 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and faces that looked like skulls carved from black stone. Zarathul moved to attack. But Daniel was faster. He crossed the distance to the first warrior in less than a second. His hand shot out and grabbed the rifle barrel, twisting it away with a sharp motion that broke the warrior's grip. Then he drove his elbow into the creature's throat with enough force to send it staggering backward. The second warrior swung at him with a clawed fist. Daniel ducked under the blow, grabbed the arm, and used the warrior's own momentum to throw it into the third attacker. Both of them crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Daniel picked up the fallen rifle and checked it with practiced efficiency. His movements were smooth, professional, nothing like the gentle diplomat she had married. He glanced at Zarathul with eyes that had gone cold and hard. "Stay behind me," he said. "We're leaving." She wanted to argue. She was the queen, the warrior, the one who should be protecting him. But something in his voice made her obey without question. They moved through the palace corridors with Daniel in front. More HFY appeared, drawn by the sounds of combat. Daniel dealt with each of them efficiently and without hesitation. He used the rifle when he could, his hands when he could not. She watched him break bones, dislocate joints, and disable opponents twice his size with techniques she had never seen before. A plasma bolt caught him in the shoulder. He grunted with pain but kept moving, blood soaking through his shirt. Another bolt grazed his leg. He ignored it. They reached a section of the palace that was burning. The fire blocked their path, flames reaching toward the ceiling with hungry intensity. Daniel studied the wall for a moment, then drove his fist through it. The stone cracked and crumbled. He hit it again and again, until there was a hole large enough to climb through. His knuckles were bloody and raw. He did not seem to notice. On the other side, they found more enemies. Daniel had run out of ammunition, so he picked up a broken pipe from the rubble and used it as a weapon. He fought with savage efficiency, each strike precise and devastating. Zarathul watched him take down 7 HFY warriors in less than 2 minutes. Then he turned to her and she saw the extent of his injuries. The shoulder wound was deep, still bleeding heavily. His leg was barely supporting his weight. His hands were torn and swollen. By any reasonable measure, he should have been unconscious from pain and blood loss. He was still standing. "Can you walk?" he asked her. She realized with shock that she was injured too. A piece of shrapnel had caught her during the explosion. She had been so focused on Daniel that she had not even noticed. "I think so," she said. "But my leg." He did not let her finish. He bent down, lifted her over his shoulder with his good arm, and started walking. She weighed nearly twice what a human woman would weigh, with her dense bones and scaled body. Daniel carried her as if she were a child. They traveled for 2 kilometers through burning corridors and debris-filled gardens. Daniel never stopped, never slowed, never complained. His breathing grew ragged and his steps became unsteady, but he kept moving forward. Finally, they reached the outer courtyard. Valorian soldiers were there, fighting to retake the palace. When they saw the queen being carried by her human husband, they rushed to help. Daniel set Zarathul down gently on the ground. He straightened up, swayed slightly, and gave the soldiers a tired smile. "There are still enemies in the east wing," he said. "About 30 of them. The rest are down." Then he collapsed. The medical team arrived minutes later. They rushed Daniel to the emergency ward, while Zarathul watched with something she had never felt before. It took her a moment to recognize the emotion. Fear. She was afraid for him. The doctors worked on Daniel for hours. When they finally emerged, their expressions were confused and troubled. "Your husband has 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder that was reset manually during combat, severe blood loss, second-degree burns on his arms, and multiple lacerations, the lead doctor reported. By all medical standards, he should have died. He should have gone into shock within the first 10 minutes of sustaining these injuries. Instead, he carried you for 2 kilometers and fought multiple opponents. We do not understand how this is possible. Zarathul understood. She had read about this in the Earth archives. Humans had something they called adrenaline, a chemical that could temporarily suppress pain and boost physical performance to superhuman levels. But more than that, humans had willpower. They could force their bodies to continue functioning through sheer determination, ignoring signals that would have shut down any other species. She walked into Daniel's room and found him awake. He was pale, bandaged, connected to machines that monitored his vital signs. But his eyes were alert, and he smiled when he saw her. "Hey," he said weakly. "How are you feeling?" She stared at him in disbelief. "You nearly died. You were shot, burned, and beaten. You carried me through a war zone with injuries that should have killed you. And you are asking how I feel?" He shrugged, then winced at the pain the movement caused. "I was worried about you. You got hit by that shrapnel pretty bad." Zarathul sat down beside his bed. She took his hand in hers, careful not to disturb the bandages. For a long moment, she did not speak. She did not know what to say. Finally, she asked the only question that mattered. "What are you, Daniel Carter? What are humans really?" Daniel looked at her with tired eyes. His smile faded, replaced by something serious and ancient. "I think," he said slowly, "it's time I told you the truth about Earth." The medical bay was quiet. Machines hummed softly in the background, monitoring Daniel's vital signs as he recovered from his injuries. Zarathul sat beside his bed, waiting for him to explain. She had demanded answers, and now she would have them. Daniel stared at the ceiling for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and measured, the voice of a teacher explaining something important. "Do you know what a death world is?" he asked. Zarathul nodded slowly. "A planet with conditions so extreme that intelligent life should not be able to evolve there. High gravity, toxic atmosphere, dangerous wildlife, extreme temperatures. Such worlds are rare, and the species that survive on them are considered extremely dangerous. Earth is a death world," Daniel said simply. She stared at him. "That is impossible. Your planet was classified as temperate and habitable. The initial surveys showed no extreme conditions." Daniel laughed, though it clearly hurt him to do so. "The surveys were done from orbit. They saw blue oceans and green forests and assumed Earth was gentle. They did not understand what lives in those oceans and forests." He turned his head to look at her directly. "Let me tell you about my home. Earth's gravity is nearly twice the galactic average for inhabited worlds. Your people feel light and quick here on Throne because the gravity is normal for you. For me, this place feels like floating. I have lived my entire life carrying the equivalent of a weighted suit that never comes off." Zarathul processed this information with growing unease. Valorian children trained with weighted suits to build strength. The idea that humans grew up in such conditions naturally was disturbing. "Our atmosphere is corrosive," Daniel continued. "It contains a gas called oxygen at levels that would be toxic to most species. We breathe it constantly. Our blood carries it through our bodies. It is literally keeping us alive while slowly breaking down our cells. Humans age and die partly because our own air is poisoning us every moment of our existence. That is insane," she whispered. "It gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective." Daniel shifted slightly, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Earth's surface is 70% covered by water. Our oceans are filled with creatures that exist only to kill. Sharks that can smell blood from miles away. jellyfish with venom that causes unbearable pain, giant squids in the deep places that we have never fully explored. And those are just the ones we know about. He paused to catch his breath. The land is no safer. We have insects that spread diseases capable of wiping out millions. Spiders whose bite can kill in hours. Snakes with venom that destroys your nervous system. Bears that can tear through metal. Wolves that hunt in packs and never stop following their prey. Zarathil listened in growing horror. She had conquered worlds, fought enemies across the galaxy, faced dangers that would break most species. But the picture Daniel was painting made her stomach turn. And then there is the weather, Daniel said. Hurricanes that level entire cities. Earthquakes that swallow buildings whole. Volcanoes that bury civilizations in ash. Floods, droughts, ice ages, heat waves. Our planet is constantly trying to kill us, and it has been doing so for millions of years. He looked at her with eyes that held no fear, no regret, only a quiet pride. And we survived. Not just survived. We thrived. We crawled out of the primordial mud, and we refused to die. Every predator that hunted us, we hunted back. Every disease that struck us, we found a cure. Every disaster that should have ended us, we rebuilt and carried on. Zarathil remembered the historical archive she had read. The wars, the plagues, the catastrophes. Humans had faced extinction dozens of times and somehow always pulled through. We evolved as persistent predators, Daniel explained. We are not the fastest or the strongest or the most heavily armored, but we can run longer than any creature on Earth. Our ancestors used to chase animals for days until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. We walked them to death. No other species does this. He held up his bandaged hands. Our bodies are designed to endure. We can survive temperatures that range from burning heat to freezing cold. We can eat almost anything organic. We can recover from injuries that would kill other species. Our bones can break and heal stronger than before. Our bodies can shut off pain when survival demands it. Zarathil thought about the previous night. Daniel had fought through wounds that should have disabled him completely. He had carried her for kilometers while bleeding out. His body had simply refused to stop functioning until the job was done. There is a human saying, Daniel continued. What does not kill me makes me stronger. For most species, this is just a phrase. For humans, it is literally true. We adapt. We overcome. We endure. It is written into our very biology. He reached over and took her hand, his grip weak but steady. Do you know why no species has ever successfully conquered Earth? It is not because of our technology or our weapons. Those came later. It is because humans do not know how to surrender. We have fought wars against enemies with superior numbers, superior technology, superior everything. And we won because we refused to accept defeat. Zarathil remembered the Moraxian invasion. The reports had been classified at the highest levels, but she had read them during her research. The Moraxians had landed 3 million soldiers on Earth. They had superior weapons, body armor, and air support. They had expected the conquest to take a week. It took 5 years, and none of them went home. The Moraxians thought they could break us, Daniel said, as if reading her thoughts. They destroyed our cities and killed our families and burned our fields. And we made them pay for every inch of ground in blood. We fought with guns until we ran out of bullets. Then we fought with knives. Then with rocks. Then with our bare hands. We turned their own weapons against them. We poisoned their food. We ambushed them in the night. We made their lives a living nightmare until they begged for permission to leave. His voice had grown hard, cold, nothing like the gentle diplomat she knew. For a moment, she saw something ancient and terrifying in his eyes. The predator that lurked beneath the surface of every human. We are not a violent species by nature, Daniel said quietly. We want peace. We want to build and create and explore. But when something threatens us, when something tries to hurt the people we love, we become something else. Something that frightens even us. Zarathil understood now. She understood why Earth had never been conquered. She understood why the initial surveys had been so wrong. The scientists had looked at humans and seen weak little creatures with no natural weapons. They had not understood that the most dangerous weapon humans possessed was their mind. Why did you agree to this marriage? She asked. You could have refused. Earth could have fought us like they fought the others. Daniel's expression softened. The predator faded, replaced by the man she had come to know over the past months. Kind, patient, curious Daniel. Because I believed there was a better way, he said. War is easy. Anyone can destroy. It takes real strength to build something instead. I looked at the Valorian Empire, and I saw potential. I saw a civilization that values honor and strength and loyalty. I thought maybe, if we could find common ground, we could build something greater than either of us could alone. He squeezed her hand gently. And I was right. Look at us. Look at what we have accomplished in just a few months. Your agricultural problems solved with human techniques. Cultural exchange, understanding, friendship. He smiled, and it was the warm smile she remembered from their wedding day. I did not come here to conquer your people, Zarathil. I came here to show them what humanity could be when we are not fighting for survival. I came here to prove that we can be partners instead of enemies. Zarathil sat in silence for a long time. Everything she had believed about humans, about strength, about power, was being rewritten in her mind. She had thought Daniel was weak because he was kind. She had been catastrophically wrong. True strength was not about destroying your enemies. True strength was about choosing not to destroy them when you had every reason and ability to do so. Daniel Carter was the strongest person she had ever met, and she had almost missed it completely. I think, she said slowly, I have been a fool. Daniel laughed, then winced and pressed a hand to his ribs. Maybe a little, but you are learning. That is what matters. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of deep affection in Valorian culture. He accepted it with quiet grace. Rest now, she said. When you are healed, we have much work to do. What kind of work? He asked. She pulled back and smiled at him, showing her fangs in a way that would have terrified most humans. But Daniel just looked at her with curiosity. The kind that changes everything, she said. Word spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. The human who had defeated a Kethri strike team with his bare hands. The soft little creature from the death world who had carried the Valorian queen to safety while bleeding from wounds that should have killed him. Daniel Carter, the diplomat from Kansas, had become a legend overnight. Ambassadors from a dozen species requested audiences with him. Military commanders wanted to study human combat techniques. Scientists wanted to examine human physiology. Everyone wanted to understand how such a seemingly fragile species could possess such terrifying capabilities. Daniel handled the attention with his usual calm grace. He answered questions patiently, demonstrated human endurance when asked, and always steered conversations toward cooperation rather than conflict. He was not interested in making other species fear humanity. He wanted them to respect humanity, and more importantly, to work alongside them. The Valorian Military Council had been dismissive of humans before the attack. They had viewed Earth as a minor addition to the Empire, useful for its strategic location, but otherwise unremarkable. Now they hung on Daniel's every word. He taught them about human military history, about battles won against impossible odds, about the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had defined human warfare for thousands of years. He introduced them to concepts they had never considered. Guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, the idea that sometimes the smallest soldier could bring down the largest enemy through cleverness and determination. Strength is not about size or power, Daniel told the council during one session. It is about will. The warrior who refuses to fall will always defeat the warrior who expects to win easily. Remember that, and you will never underestimate an opponent again. The generals nodded slowly, scribbling notes on their tablets. They had conquered worlds, but they had never thought about war the way this human did. Daniel also started something he called the exchange program. Human volunteers came to Valorian space, sharing their knowledge and skills with alien cultures. Artists taught new forms of expression. Scientists shared research methodologies. Athletes demonstrated the limits of human physical capability. In return, Valorians and their allied species visited Earth. They walked through human cities, amazed by the chaos and creativity of human civilization. They sampled human food, listened to human music, watched human films. Many of them returned home changed, with new perspectives on what other species could achieve. Zarathil watched all of this with quiet pride. Her husband was reshaping the galaxy not through conquest or force, but through connection. He was building bridges that had never existed before, creating understanding where there had been only suspicion and fear. She found herself spending more and more time with him. What had begun as a political arrangement had become something deeper. She looked forward to their evening conversations. She missed him when they were apart. She worried about him when he pushed himself too hard, which was often. One night, she found him in the palace garden, tending to his earth vegetables by starlight. He was kneeling in the dirt, carefully examining the leaves of a tomato plant, completely absorbed in his work. He did not notice her approach until she sat down beside him. "You should be resting," she said. "Your shoulder is not fully healed." He smiled without looking up. The plants needed attention. "They do not care about my shoulder." She watched him work for a while, his hands gentle and precise despite the calluses and old scars. This was the same man who had killed 7 Kethray warriors in under 2 minutes. The same man who had terrified the military council with descriptions of human persistence and resilience. And here he was, worrying about vegetables. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Do what?" "Switch between those 2 sides of yourself. The warrior and the gardener. The diplomat and the fighter. How do you hold both of them inside you at once?" Daniel finally looked up, considering her question carefully. "I do not think they are different sides. I think they are the same thing. Humans fight so hard because we love so deeply. We protect what matters to us with everything we have. The garden, my students back home, you, the empire, it is all connected. I take care of the small things because they remind me why the big things matter." He reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "When I was carrying you through that burning palace, I was not thinking about survival or victory. I was thinking about the future we could build together. About the gardens we could grow, and the worlds we could explore, and the problems we could solve. That is what kept me moving. That is what humans do. We imagine a better tomorrow, and we refuse to let anything stop us from reaching it." Zarathil felt something shift inside her. A wall she had not known she was building came tumbling down. She had married this man for political advantage. She had grown curious about him out of confusion and surprise. But somewhere along the way, without her permission or awareness, she had fallen in love with him. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Yes? I am glad you volunteered for this marriage. I am glad you came to us. I am glad you are my husband." He looked at her with those warm human eyes, the eyes that could go cold and deadly when needed but chose warmth instead. "I am glad too. Though I have to admit, the palace is much nicer than my apartment back in Kansas." She laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised them both. "Is that the only reason?" "No," he said, growing serious. "The truth is, I have never met anyone like you. You are fierce and proud and powerful. You could crush me without effort. But you choose kindness. You listen and learn and grow. You care about your people deeply enough to consider a stranger's ideas about crops and cooking." He lifted her hand and pressed it to his cheek. "I look at you and I see a future worth fighting for. I see a galaxy where Valorians and humans work together, where our children can explore stars we have never seen, where strength and compassion exist side by side. That is why I am here. That is why I will always be here." 1 year after their wedding, Zarathil stood before the assembled nobles of the Valorian Empire. Daniel stood beside her, no longer seen as a curiosity or a political pawn. He was recognized as the Queen's true partner, her equal in all ways that mattered. She announced the formation of a new alliance, not just between Earth and the Valorian Empire, but between all species who wished to join them. A federation built on mutual respect, shared knowledge, and the understanding that true strength came from unity rather than domination. The nobles cheered. They had witnessed the changes Daniel had brought to their civilization. They had seen human ingenuity solve problems that Valorian science could not crack. They had learned that the soft creatures from the Death World were not enemies to be feared, but allies to be treasured. Daniel gave a speech that day. He talked about his childhood in Kansas, about dreaming of the stars and never imagining he would actually reach them. He talked about the history of humanity, the struggles and failures and triumphs that had shaped his species. He talked about the future he believed they could build together. "We did not come to the stars to conquer," he said, his voice carrying across the great hall. "We came to explore, to learn, to grow. We came because the universe is vast and beautiful and terrifying, and we wanted to see it for ourselves. We came because staying home was never an option for a species that evolved on a death world. The galaxy told us we were too small, too weak, too fragile to survive out here. We came anyway." He paused, looking out at the assembled crowd with quiet confidence. "Humanity has a message for the universe. We're here. We are not going anywhere. And if you give us a chance, we will be the best friends you have ever had. But if you threaten what we love, if you try to harm our families or destroy our homes, you will discover why no one has ever successfully conquered Earth." He smiled, softening the warning with warmth. "We prefer friendship. We hope you will too." The speech ended to thunderous applause. Even Lord Vexinar, still nursing his wounded pride from the endurance contest, found himself clapping. Later that night, Zarathil found Daniel on the palace balcony, looking up at the stars. She stood beside him in comfortable silence, two rulers from different worlds sharing a quiet moment. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Leaving Earth? Leaving everything you knew?" Daniel shook his head. "I do miss it sometimes. The blue sky, the smell of rain, the sound of birds in the morning. But I gained so much more than I lost. A purpose, a partner, a chance to make a real difference in the galaxy." He turned to look at her, and his expression was peaceful and content. "Besides, I always wanted to see the stars. Remember?" She remembered. She remembered a strange little human standing at the window of her ship, staring into the void with wonder instead of fear. She remembered thinking he was weak and boring and utterly unremarkable. She had been so wrong. About him, about humanity, about everything. He took her hand and followed her into the palace. Behind them, the stars burned bright and eternal, witnesses to a new chapter in galactic history. The universe had underestimated humanity. It had looked at their soft bodies and short lives and assumed they were nothing special. It had not understood that the most dangerous creatures in existence, were not the ones with the sharpest claws or the strongest armor. The most dangerous creatures were the ones who never gave up. The ones who,